Welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Our theme for 2025 is the future of work. Meaning is the new money. In a world shaped by rapid innovation and constant change, the pursuit of purpose and impact has never been more important. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host, bringing over 30 years of experience in leadership, strategic thinking, and purpose-driven innovation. Here, we tackle the pressing challenges of our time, from the rise of artificial intelligence to the growing need for meaning in the workplace. Together, we'll uncover how leaders can ethically integrate AI to enhance decision-making and keep humanity at the heart of their organizations. Remember, amidst all the technological advancements, in the end, it's always about the people. This podcast is your resource for actionable tools, thought-provoking discussions, and inspiring stories. It's time to go beyond leadership development and focus on leadership impact, creating workplaces where people thrive, innovation flourishes, and meaning truly becomes the new currency. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Now, let's throttle up and dive into today's episode. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me is Dr. Lance Knaub. Lance is a keynote speaker, best-selling author of The 4% Breakthrough and The Drive to Success, Volume 2. He's the founder of Denali Consulting and Breakthrough Physical Therapy and Fitness. With a focus on helping entrepreneurs scale their businesses, Lance specializes in building self-managing companies that allow business owners to avoid burnout while creating a life they truly love. His approach empowers leaders to develop strong leadership teams and transform their businesses into valuable, sought-after assets. Through his work at Denali Consulting, Lance has helped countless entrepreneurs achieve freedom and fulfillment by teaching them to delegate effectively, streamline operations, and create sustainable systems. His expertise in leadership strategy and business growth has made him a trusted advisor to private practice owners and high-performing entrepreneurs alike. Lance's passion is helping business leaders unlock their potential, achieve balance, and lead with purpose, and I am truly pleased to have him here with me today. Good morning, Lance. How are you?
Good morning. Fantastic. So excited to be here with you today.
Thank you so very much. As I like to say, let's take it from the top. So, Lance, if someone were to walk up to you and ask you for your definition or perspective on leadership, what would you say to them?
Yes, I love your passion. And again, thanks for having me. For everyone tuning in, be sure you like and subscribe. There's so much good content Dr. Dentico is sharing with the world, and especially on leadership. So, as I mentioned, I know this is a question you ask, and I don't remember what I put in the prelim answers, but my mind goes to John Maxwell and influence initially. And I think that is important, right? Some of us can remember the commercials, maybe Hewlett Packard and whatever company it was, and whoever is noticed, that could be one perspective of leadership. But I think that leadership is so much more. I think that leaders, we know the Gino Wickman, the EOS version of a visionary or integrator. So I do think that leaders like Steve Jobs, they think big, they have unique and grand visions of improving and changing the world. I think that's important. And they're also willing to lean into it enough that it actually gets done. Again, similar to Steve Jobs. And I just read something about Apple, how they haven't had many new products since Steve Jobs. They haven't really pioneered as much. Steve Jobs was great at having a vision, but also bringing it to the finish line and within the right amount of time, because we know that the world is competitive, right? So there might be other people with great ideas and they may be similar to yours. There's definitely a timing element. So, yeah, and I feel impact comes to mind as well. although that might be a little bit cliche and overused. Yeah, those are my first thoughts on leadership, but we could probably talk about this all day, all week, all month, John.
Yeah, you've watched some previous podcasts, so you know that my leadership model I started developing 30 years ago is based on one premise, and that premise is contribution. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the fact that you have a problem or an issue before you. I think even Jobs talked about this when they were creating the Macintosh, that there was this problem, this issue, and you just open the door and say, who's got an idea? Who wants to help? Who wants to weigh in? And I see that more and more today, especially in the wake of the COVID pandemic. That, and I agree with John Maxwell. I agree that leadership, in fact, part of my definition, the first part of my definition, leadership is an influence relationship. And anyone can have influence.
Right,
That's the beauty of it. Anyone can
right.
influence. You
Because
never
the other
know.
part that I mentioned, yeah, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
John Maxwell, I love 21 Laws of Leadership is a great book for everyone listening. And he had a newer, updated version that was the workbook. And I took all of our leaders through that process. Really an incredible tool and resource. And Gino Wickman, a couple of years ago, came out with a book called The Entrepreneurial Leap, designed for startup. And the reason I compare Maxwell versus Wickman is Wickman believes that the leadership characteristics you either have or do not have. And that's not as exciting for me, this whole concept of being a natural leader. I really resonate with John Maxwell more, that we can develop each one of the criteria, which is what you're talking about now.
Yeah. I'm a learn by doing guy. Okay. You learn by doing. And I think leaders are made or developed through their learning experiences, through the mistakes that they make.
Right.
Mistakes, as you well know, are a great teacher. They
The
take you down.
best.
Wait a minute, yeah, I did that. I really messed that. I got to rethink that problem. Kind of a kind of an approach. And I would be more on that side of the line, way more on that side of the line. Because here's a problem. I was thinking, always looking for a metaphor or looking for a better way to express the ideas. Too much of the leadership perspective, in my opinion, is like waiting for the person. It's like waiting on a train platform, hoping that the next train that pulls in is the magical leader will appear. Okay, no one seemed to get off that one. Well, we'll wait for the next train. And when I wrote Throttle Up, when I wrote my book, the beginning of the book says that the book was dedicated to 80% of the people who think leadership is somebody else's responsibility, that everyone can be a leader, that everyone can choose to say, I'm going to make a difference. And that is the linchpin. I want to know a lot of times people get frustrated with business. You see that a lot today.
For sure.
I'm tired of dealing with the bureaucracy. I'm tired of dealing with the same old mindset. And they go out on their own. They get to that point where they say, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go out on my own. At least it's up to me to make a success. And again, this dovetails into our discussion later in a few minutes about entrepreneurship. So I think in many respects, it's what you choose to do and the difference you choose to make. And that's the begins the journey, in my opinion, of a leader. Let's move on, if you will. We'll move on to the second
Sure.
question. Lance, you speak about the idea of a self-managed company. Can you peel that onion back a bit and explain what you mean by that?
For sure. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, who's one of my favorite thought leaders, for those listening, definitely check him out. He just wrote 3 books, partnered with Dan Sullivan, Who Not How, 10X is Easier Than 2X, and The Gap and the Gain. And he really made this concept common now. Most people are familiar with it. It's really the idea of building a team and developing your team, which is part of the definition. I probably work into that first question. Really, just in sports, you develop your players. I like that analogy with leadership, helping people reach their best selves and their ceiling. So if you think about a chessboard, right, instead of you being one piece or many pieces on the board, now your team is running the company, running the organization, and it's a beautiful thing. And you can continue to be in the owner hat overlooking everything, and you could spread your wings and go on and do other great things to cause impact and contribute to the world. So yeah, and for me, one thing that I'll just mention, I leverage partnership to create a self-managing team to really expedite that. And partnership wasn't extremely common in the physical therapy practices. And I studied it from all industries, created a partnership track. We brought on our best people as partners, and we had many of the great talent attracted to us because we had a partnership track. It was totally unique, right? Of course, the hospital systems and the private equity and all the other players can't compete with that. And after at one of our development plan meetings, talk about developing your people outside of a review, having meetings with your best people and ideally all of your people and asking their short and long-term goals. One of our people looked me in the eye and said he wanted to run the company. I almost swallowed my tongue. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I took a deep breath, realized, wow, this is cool. And we mapped out a development plan. And in 3 years, they took over our first child, my wife and I. And at that time, our 5-location, multi-million-dollar business that was most of our net worth and savings and just everything. But it allowed me to then, we'll talk about, figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to serve the world next.
Yeah. So when you talk about partners, you're just talking about one or two people as a business partner. You're talking about a range of partnership. Am I getting that right with a group of people?
Specifically, yeah, you're right. The word partnerships can mean so many things. I'm speaking about equity partnership in the business. We took on people and we divided up the pie. And there's models where some people are starting a new pie for every location and whatnot. We brought people into the one pie of the organization, and we were a team together on 100%.
Great, great. Thanks for that explanation. Because so you use that word partnerships, and people immediately think there's two people or three
Right.
people, that kind of a thing. Instead of really, there's more to it than just two or three people signing a document that says we're now partners or different things like that. So I appreciate that. I know we share a similar passion for the power of strategy. What is it about strategy that you find so attractive or important?
This is a great question. And just similar to you and what we've already been talking about, I'm always rethinking things and open minded. And just yesterday on one of my masterminds, a friend of mine mentioned that we're getting ready to go to Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within in a couple of weeks. And we're all very excited in person in Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. And my friend has been really going through Tony Robbins resources. And Tony Robbins said something like, not to have a to-do list or not to have a task list. And we were all just trying to wrap our heads around this because, of course, I am such an advocate for strategy. My current opinion is that many people and many entrepreneurs go straight to action and they're going to run down in the trenches and fight the battles. And right, 96% of them lose, unfortunately. That's like the title of my book, The 4% Breakthrough. And the stats are pretty grim that 96% of entrepreneurs and businesses fail in 10 years. So I feel like with just
I agree. I'm a big believer in strategic thinking and well, but I see them as two different processes. And I always look at the process. What are we doing and what's the outcome of the process? So for me, strategic planning is about finding answers to questions that normally are derived by the senior leaders in the organization. But what happens if the senior leaders in the organization are not aware of some of the really difficult problems that have not been surfaced? Well, that's where strategic thinking comes in because in strategic thinking, we want to make sure we're asking ourselves the right questions. I like to say, sort of a humorous take on a tragedy, and that is if you don't do strategic thinking before you do strategic planning, it's much like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic because
okay,
nobody cares where the drink trolley is if you have a gaping hole in the boat. You got a
right,
bigger problem. And as you well know, I think you've alluded to this, the halls of business are lined with the carcasses of organizations and companies that never took the time to ask themselves the right questions. They just as I like to say, hope the catastrophe missed them.
Right.
So maybe in the strategic planning process, they were solving problems, but they were solving the wrong problems. I'd love to get
Right.
your reflection on that.
A lot to unpack here. I do like this idea of thinking versus planning. And I love what you're saying about getting your people involved, because going back to leadership, one of my strength weaknesses at one point was I was getting so much input from our team that the decision making process was very slow. And we had a new manager that was very seasoned. And he said, Lance, you need to make some more executive decisions. And I did have to adjust that and sometimes there were just complete executive decisions. However, it can't be 100% executive decisions. You do need, that's another pearl of life and business, right? Just really adopting the mindset of welcoming feedback and all the input from your team. And even for me, I had a mentor who took all of the new companies in IBM through the 80s through the marketing business planning process. And fortunately, she's retired and lived in my town and became a fitness member and patient and offered to mentor me. And breakthrough got better and better going through a business planning process. However, I did realize in 2018 when I started working with entrepreneurs that it was a little too big and bulky. Even Denali Consulting had a 50-page business plan. So I boiled it down and I did add one thing to make it what I call a life and business plan. And I think you talked about this in your episode with Dr. Poklar, kind of about your purpose and your mission. So I really want entrepreneurs to get clear on that, their cause, their reason, their why, their purpose, their mission, whatever you want to call it. Because if they don't look through that lens first and satisfy that, then they're going to lose their family, their health, whatever their true big boulders are and priorities in their life, which does connect to burnout, a passion of yours. In my opinion, this process, which I call a jolt, together with my book, which is a process, the 4% breakthrough, are my antidotes to burnout and to achieving a fulfilled, happy life. Again, yeah, so much to unpack, but I do like this differentiation between the thinking and the planning. And I do think the last thing I'll say is I feel like the magic is in the process. So for me, it's my boiled down jolt process, but there's no perfect process. But I'd recommend that everyone listening go through a process, especially this time of year. This might come out at the beginning of the year, so hopefully you'll have your plans in place. But if you don't, take the time. I believe it only has to be 10% of your year, your month, your day, and your week, but it can't be zero. Every day we do need to know what the needle movers are for that day, that week, that month, and that year.
Yeah, I agree. I think you touched on something, and it's something that I've returned to with great fervor, and that is this notion of mission statements. Simple, succinct. You get one sentence, as I like to say, and you better
Right,
say it in one sentence. And I think, and the reason is, the chief reason is that, in the last year and a half, I've been talking about values alignment, that people are coming into organizations in the wake of the COVID pandemic, not looking for a paycheck any longer, per se. Oh, sure, they want to get paid, don't get me wrong. But they're looking for one of the chief things is values alignment. How does my values align with the organization? Are we on the same page? Do we care about the same things? And I recognized that I had walked away from or shied away from talking about mission statements because I got tired. I get tired, oh, yeah, you got one of those mission statements? Oh, yeah, it's hanging on the wall. Oh, you do it? You breathe it? You love it every day? No, it just hangs on the wall. We go by it every day. So, no, you can't expect to bring people into your organization and want values alignment between the organization and that person if the organization itself is not clear and distinct about the values that it supports. You got this, it's like building a bridge from one side of the river. You have to build a bridge from two sides of the river. Oh, so it meets in the middle. And to me now,
right.
that's become so very important to me about that, about having a mission statement of focus. I'd love to get your reflection on that idea.
Facing and brief is better. And then there's even the vision, which these words, there's a lot of semantic mistakes, but sometimes people use them differently. When I think of vision, this is the North Star, this is the goal. So I recommend that a company have their vision, and Cameron Herold, the book Vivid Vision, recommends that even that be outwardly facing. And I recommend that. And we did that exercise, and it was like a 2-page document that really was our map to success. People knew how to greet people like a family member in their home, like a guest in their home, and greet them by their name. And people should not wait more than 5 minutes ever for an appointment. And all these things. It was a 2-page, very specific document. And the only thing I removed for everybody was some of the specific financial targets. But going back to missions, for the individual leaders and entrepreneurs listening, I would recommend even going one step before that company mission for your organizations and knowing what's most important to you. And what you're challenging your listeners to do in a one sentence is not easy. One pearl that I've learned is if you just ask people, if they're struggling to make that short version, I ask them to just list their priorities, and they can do it in 60 seconds, their top 5 priorities. And I always share with them, by the way, a lot of thought leaders believe that taking care of yourself, putting the oxygen mask on first, should be number one, because that's sort of part of my core message, as you mentioned in the intro, helping entrepreneurs stay healthy while they scale their businesses. And to me, what that means is having a healthy lifestyle. So you're doing everything in your control, and you're not working 80 hours a week. Hopefully you're working much less and much more efficiently so you can have time on those big boulders we just talked about. And then a healthy business, what that means to me is getting paid commensurate for the roles you have, the pieces you're wearing on the chessboard, and then also having double-digit profitability beyond that. And this may not be from a tax purpose. We're slicing it a different way. And then having a valuable asset that you could keep or sell. Because in 2018, when I created a self-managing company, the business became even more valuable. It was less dependent on the owner-founder. And that's a sweet place to be. And for everyone listening, frankly, I did go from working 80 hours a week and all that responsibility, and I made just as much because our partners kept the profitability up and we kept growing, and for just meeting once a month with my leadership. So it's very fun. And then even a final chapter beyond the book, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but we were approached by private equity in 2021. We did partner with a bigger company. So our original plan of having an independent company and being a wealth generating tool, that's part of the reason I want to get a partnership book out in 2025 to share this with a little bit more people, because so many entrepreneurs really feel like the only successful succession plan end game is to sell your business, and it's not. That's of course good, and we could talk about that because I've lived it. But there is this other independent option, and partnership would most likely be part of that scenario.
Yeah, I wrote a small section in my book on mergers and acquisitions, and because I was fascinated by how does one create an organization that is ready for sale, for
Right.
example, and what would and again, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm always concerned about the implication of models or ideas of leadership on different things, from burnout to collaboration, and also to mergers and acquisitions. And I knew a guy who was involved in M&A for a while. His name's Greg Boucher, and Greg and I had lunch one day, and we were talking about, and my question was simply this: which company is more valuable? Is the company where the senior leaders in the organization hold all the information to themselves? There's only a small pocket of decision making at the top? Or is a company more valuable that has a distributed decision making process? In other words, there are a number of people at different levels involved in the leadership, in the contribution, in the leadership of the organization. And he said by far it was the latter one, where there's distributed information, because when you sell a company, the senior leaders may leave and go someplace else. And now you're left with a group of people and a company that the brain trust, if you will, has walked away. So it's a
Right.
very interesting perspective of you bringing that up, because I haven't visited that in a long time. But in terms of M&A, the more involved you have with people, the more information, the more sharing, the more collaboration, the company in the end is worth more.
Probably the more leadership, go back to your passion and our conversation, the more leadership you each person has, and the more structure for leadership, setup, design, so the more freedom they have. Because otherwise, if you check their brains at the door, if you set it up that they really, at every level, instead of being a compounding effect for positivity, it becomes negativity, and you will lose. An organization like that doesn't absolutely tap into and harness the best of every person on the team will not win in the long term.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One of the metaphors, you may have heard this before, and one of the metaphors I'm using lately is Star Wars to
Okay.
explain the shift in the leadership dynamic. So for years, for 50, 60, 70 years, we've gone along and raised a generation of Jedi Knights as the senior leaders of the organization, right? With the hope that when they needed, they would come down, brandish the light sword, and vanquish the problems and issues that lay before us, okay? And say, today, the world is different. Today, senior leaders in the organization have to see themselves more as Yoda. And what
Okay.
did Yoda do? Yoda was the facilitator. Yoda was the teacher. Yoda was the one that put the challenges in front of Luke and taught Luke by experience, learning by doing. The way I see it today, and I think it more and more we're seeing this, is that senior leaders in the organization are raising a generation of Jedi Knights to go off and do the things that need to be done for the organization on so many different levels. I'd love to get your response to that idea.
Yeah, no, I love this analogy with Star Wars. And yeah, I think it goes back to probably a consolidated answer to your leadership question. I believe that it's all about leaders, it's all about being a great teacher, being a developer. I resonate with the word coach, not the word consultant. And there's a personal trainer, physical therapist, Martin Rudy, who's written several books on coaching, and it's the greatest job in the world. And my success is other people's success, right? I feel like that's super important. So absolutely, and even the org chart, the org board, whatever you want to call it, I love to flip it. So it's not leadership at the top, it's leadership and ownership, however you want to shape it, at the bottom. We're supporting our team, and our team is above us, and the clients are above that. Yes, I totally resonate with really all being about developing the team who thinks at every level and can solve problems. And then leadership job actually becomes much easier if you give people that much freedom, including what I touched on earlier, development plan, let tapping into their short and long-term goals, and where their goals align with the company's goals, you can actually put it in writing. That your people will not go anywhere. For example, our person that wanted to be the CEO, he was not going to go anywhere. He wasn't going to have that opportunity again and anywhere else. And then even after a year, he wanted to be the majority owner. And we said, absolutely. You'll continue to buy in, and our other great people can buy in, like literally like buy in as owners, people who met the partnership criteria. And then in 5 or 6 years, when our youngest is in college, you'll actually be the majority owner, and the cycle will repeat. And just more recently, a physical therapist at Breakthrough, wanted to start a YouTube channel. And unfortunately, they had to come to us. I wasn't leading at the time, but I was coaching our leadership team. And this time it included private equity, some of the smartest, most sophisticated business people and minds in the world. That this talented person, they don't even want any additional compensation, but they're going to do this passion project, and it's actually going to be another profit center for us and a marketing vehicle. And in addition to that, it's a retention tool. They're going to stay with us for the next 5 or 10 years.
All right. I had a recent guest named Dr. Michael Gerhardt from Germany on, and he's written 3 books on communication. He was a wonderful guest. And he brought this point up, and I thought it was just so right on the money. And then when we talk about leaders and leadership, we're switching from this notion of persuasion, is the way he used it, the leader as persuader,
Right.
to resonance, this
Okay.
notion of resonating with the people in your organization, so that, as you say, you're creating, I'll use this old cliche, you're creating a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts,
Right.
that you're resonating with the people, that instead of trying to persuade them, getting out the megaphone and just talking it up all the time, instead you're connecting with them at a heartfelt level and engaging them and bringing them along and building leadership capacity, as I like to say, the ability of the organization to rise. In the Navy, we had a wonderful expression that said, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the whole idea of resonance, is everybody tuned in to each other and to the goals of the organization. Any thoughts on that from you?
I love it. My mind goes to John Maxwell, the law of exponential growth, where leaders are actually creating leaders. And yes, I think that if the founders and visionaries listening who started the companies don't hold tight all of your skill and knowledge, be vulnerable, and be a great teacher and coach, so that each one of those individuals can then replicate that same process and it will compound or be exponential. That is a common theme, and it really touches on each one of the talking points that we've had today.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important. Really gravitate to that idea of resonance. That's We're all humming at the same frequency in the organization, in a manner of speaking. And I think it's a wonderful idea and a wonderful metaphor. So, Lance, I think we're getting close to the end here. And I want to ask you what I now refer to as my worldwide question. I've asked it for people from all over the globe: Australia, New Zealand, India, the UK, Germany, Spain, and certainly in the US. And that is, if you had a magic wand and could wave it at a problem or an issue that you see in the work world in which you live, what would that problem be? And why did you choose that?
The problem that I would address, we've already spoken about. It would be helping entrepreneurs to understand the value and the benefit of strategic thinking and planning, of strategy, and teach them how to approach it so that because it can be daunting to feel like I don't have time to break away and plan. And also, just the world today is constant noise and bells and buzzes and dings and notifications. And really, that's a gift of doing some higher level thinking, some vision work, some mission work, all that dreaming, and which to me is the strategy work. Because right now, like so many entrepreneurs, there's a common theme, right? They have their greatest ideas in the shower. That's the only time. It's very sad that they're away from all the noise of their employees and their children and can have some time for themselves. So I really want to reverse, because I've talked about the failure rate being 96%. And in my 6 years of collecting data, it's almost a perfect match with the percent of businesses that don't have a strategy, a strategic plan in place. It's right about 95, 96% in my data collection. So that's what I would share. And it doesn't have to be hard. I'll share the framework that I mentioned earlier with everyone listening. Besides that traditional business planning process, decide what's most important to you, as we spoke about earlier, and then know what's most important to your company, and then dream and have your vision, because it just Stephen Covey, right? Begin with the end in mind. You're not going to accidentally land on success. So really dream. And I'm an advocate not for just a 5-year, 10-year vision, but the perfect ending, if there is such a thing. And then you can boil that down to a 1-year plan, your strategy, your objectives, critical success factors, and then only then look through those lenses and decide on your actions. And the magic is in then repeating. If we were to do it today, it happens to be the end of October. So if we were to do November's actions, minimally at the end of November, we'd need to analyze that and repeat this scientific method, so that we were, and measuring is one of those things that's often lost, makes this hard. So make sure you measure along the way, and then go ahead and study that and make the next perfect December, and then test that as an experiment, and then repeat. It's an iterative process.
It's interesting. I kind of, to be perfectly honest about it, kind of in my own work, stepped back a little bit from a visioning process. And I'll just explain why. I now am very, and have been for a number of years, really locked in on this idea of foresight, the
Okay.
ability to understand the trends today, to look around you and say, okay, here's the demographic issue, here's the technologies issues, here's what's going on in the world today, and extrapolate that into the future to build foresight. And for me, I think that gives more of a concrete, if I could use that term, more of a concrete approach to looking into the future. Okay. Because sometimes visioning, and it's a great thing, don't get me wrong, if you can do it, if you can do the visioning, and if you have that gift, if you have the jobs gift of
Right.
visioning, right? But but for me, I say, look, here's a great place to start. Just look around you. You could do that in your businesses. You can look around your business and say, okay, where do I think that what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years? Where do we think these trends are going to take us? AI, technology, whatever it might be. And say, we have to be prepared for that. What do we do to look at and then plan to take this organization to that point? But again, just offering you a thought, just an idea that the kissing cousin of vision is foresight.
Okay. I
So
love that. You're making me think again, just like my friend yesterday with Tony Robbins' statement.
I hope so. It's my job is to hopefully help people think a little bit more deeply about what's going on in the world of leadership and the world of business and entrepreneurship as well. So, Lance, I want to thank you very much for being a guest here today on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I truly appreciate your time and effort. I wish you and your people and your organization all the best success in the future. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, everyone listening, please, Dr. John Dentico does a great job. Please follow, subscribe, share this podcast, and hopefully this episode with people who could benefit.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
Okay, thanks. You too.